And welcome to the India Hangout. In his Independence Day speech, Prime Minister Narendra Modi exhorted India to stand up and start up, or start up and stand up. He spoke of 125,000 bank branches lending to entrepreneurs, Dalits, tribals, women. The question that we are asking at the bottom of all of this is who's going to drive it and who should be driving it? Should it be the government in all its wisdom and experience, or should it be the private sector? The discussion is going to be interesting. I can assure you that. I'm here with me, Ayaz Memon. Sharat Sharma, co-founder of Brand Sigma, also from iSpirit. Harish Bijur, CEO of Harish Bijur Consultants. Mahesh Murthy, founding partner, Seed Fund. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, member of parliament and entrepreneur himself. All of you are, thank you very much. Ayaz, so just let me get the general sense. What do you think of the speech?
Well, I think by Narendra Modi's standards, it was a little sedate, and understandably so, because when you've just come into office or you've assumed office, obviously there is a whole kind of vision statement to make a year down the road, because of circumstances and because of what has transpired, and not everything is as hunky-dory as it seemed last year. Perhaps understandably it is sedate, as it should be, because you have to now list your achievements, and they may not be multifarious, they may not be multiples as you may have imagined. But it was still full of the Modi stamp, catchy statements, slogans, phrases. Some of them are important because they kind of provoke, they instigate. I think that's his attempt. And Team India, Make in India is of course now old, but I think what he is trying to do, if I read it correctly, he's trying to get a message across that he is all A for development, and these are the various ways in which it could happen. The target is...
So what over is he playing?
He's certainly not playing the slog overs. I think he's still in the initial overs. He's trying to set the kind of platform for everybody to buy into his vision.
Okay, right. And let's see where the match goes from here. Rajiv, let me start off with you. So the question that we are asking really is, can India be a startup nation first? In the true sense, or in the sense that we understand it from elsewhere, from countries like Israel. What's your take?
I think India can be and India must be, and I think over the last 20 years we've seen entrepreneurship in India grow from what was very, very nascent at the time that I started off, and to something now that is fairly fully developed as an ecosystem, with funding, with ideas, with entrepreneurs. I think the only issue that, in my opinion, still is missing is that the government is not sufficiently stepping out of the way of startups and not creating as good an enabling environment as, let's say, ecosystems in Israel have or in the Silicon Valley. But we've got most of the other pieces, and we are really now playing things that are in the technology space rather than just enterprise or business. We are really starting to push the envelope on many areas that are truly intellectual property driven.
Is it your sense that what you see happening around you in the startup ecosystem is influencing the lives of billions or a billion plus people, or is it something which is confined to some segments, let's say bringing in efficiency for some parts of the country or some parts of the population, i.e. through e-commerce and so on?
No, Govind, look, let's be very clear. Startup is part cultural, part economic. I think what startups do at a very, very basic level is create a sense of confidence and a sense of entrepreneurship at a vast cross-section of an age demographic that is wanting to get away from the traditional, move away from the traditional job markets into things that are much more fulfilling. So in that sense, it impacts a larger population. Of course, every Indian is not going to be a startup entrepreneur, and every person who's an MBA or an engineer is not going to be a startup entrepreneur. I think startups, by its very nature, will be limited. It will be an ecosystem that coalesces around truly spectacular minds, truly big achievers. And in that sense, it will not be across the board. But the impact of that freedom, the impact of that confidence amongst people who don't have a business background, who don't come from a big last name, whose grandfathers were not millionaires and billionaires, that impact of, in a sense, emancipation and democratization of wealth creation is far-reaching, and it cuts across a large segment of our population.
Rajiv, let me ask you the flip question then. But can this also trigger, unmanageable aspirations?
Look, I think you don't need to trigger unmanageable aspirations. That train has left the station many, many years ago. I think that explains Prime Minister Modi's election victory. There is a whole population in India below 35 that are in some sense chafing at their brains, and they want to break out of all of these suffocation and this big brother and the sense of the government. I think people want to break out of that. They don't want to work in the traditional ways. They want to move out. Even if you're an agriculturalist, you want to break out of the conventional model of having to keep getting bailed out by the government every season. So people are truly aspiring to be independent, to chart their own destiny, to walk their own path, rather than having some nameless, faceless bureaucrat or a nameless, faceless politician determine their destiny. That is cutting across the board, across a larger and larger population in India. So aspirations, nobody needs to set that loose. That train has left the station, and I think millions of Indians are aspiring for a life very different from their fathers and their grandfathers.
This could potentially be the roots. Where do you weigh in on this? I mean, I know that you're part of the innovation ecosystem, but do you feel this? I mean, we are stretching the definition a bit too wide, perhaps, by saying that the entire country can be a startup country.
My basic take on this is that there is a role for the government and there is a role for the private sector, and the roles should be different. What I look at the role for government is that a large scope for funding the most important kinds of public sector are really there in the equivalent of what I'd call the US Small Business Administration. The ability for banks to be able to write loans to small businesses without collateral. And this to me is an important issue. The idea that I should be able to go walk into a bank, get a loan. So already the CGT SME scheme has done that for about 1,000 or a few thousand businesses every year. Right. But what's really more important is that they should be able to do this regardless of caste, creed. I don't understand the idea of 1.25 lakh banks all funding one enterprise by one Dalit. That's ridiculous. That's destined for failure, and that will only increase the non-performing assets that we have out here. So my point is that when it comes to collateral-free lending, absolutely open it up, allow banks and urge them to make investments in this sector. When it comes to equity-based funding, now the bank money is a loan that can be repaid, but when it comes to equity-based funding, leave that to the private sector. That's my simple prescription out here.
Okay. Go ahead, Sharad.
Yeah, I think there are three types of entrepreneurs that we are talking about. The ones that are much in the press nowadays. So that's one set of entrepreneurs. Then, of course, there are these 6.5 million businessmen who, small businesses in various industrial estates who have made it big enough to actually be within the tax net. So they are going to be part of the GST net that we are talking about. And then there are literally, 12 to 14 million vegetable vendors, self-employed people. They are entrepreneurs too, and they are the telewalas, if you think of them that way. Right. I think today we are labeling all of them as entrepreneurs, but the reality is that they all need very different things to happen for them to flourish. The telewalas, they need easy credit, and that's going to happen. When we unlock the credit ecosystem, today they are being fleeced by the informal credit system, which sometimes charges between 1 to 4% for an intraday loan, right? So that system needs to be fixed. There are some ideas on the table. They need to be implemented systematically for the next 3-4 years. If you go to the middle part, which is 6.5 million entrepreneurs who are part of the GST net, they really want to get rid of the Inspector Raj. That's their fundamental problem. And the government needs to find a way to be able to do that. And that's going to be very important. And when you get to the top part of the pyramid that we talked about, keep in mind, last year, 54% of the funded companies re-domiciled themselves out of India. This year, the estimate is that 75% of the companies that will raise some kind of angel or VC money will no longer be Indian companies. So we first have the government fix those problems, and they need to be able to fix those problems so that at least that exodus of companies stops. And if you don't do that, nothing else will matter. And So really the role of the government is to take care of these basics and get out of the way. That's
Right.
the first and foremost thing
Right.
that needs to be achieved here.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Sharad. Very, very useful points. I mean, firstly, fix the Inspector Raj, which particularly targets or as is most felt by negatively, of course, the small and medium-sized businesses. And the second, of course, most companies who are raising funds, as you said, are actually incorporating outside for various reasons. So therefore, it's not really an startup India story as it's a startup elsewhere, but use the Indian market for growth. Yes.
Yeah, I think Govind, essentially, I mean, this is a non-specialist point of view. Ultimately, when you want to make it a startup country, you need to create an excitement in the environment for young people. Largely, the established industrialists, they will venture into startups as promoters or as heavy fund providers, but not necessarily as those who are completely excited by the entrepreneurship of it. They're already there. So you need to create a right kind of an environment, the right triggers, the right provocation, the right instigation, and obviously you need to create a climate where there's ease of business.
Right.
Anybody who's between the age of 20, 30, 35, if he sees himself having to wade through a morass of bureaucracy and time wastage of time, is not going to be an entrepreneur. He would rather, or she would rather, prefer to be a salaried employee who will take home
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4 lakh rupees a month.
Right. Harish, what's your sense? We haven't heard from you as yet. We sort of addressed this question about can India be a startup nation? I think Rajiv defined that pretty well, and it's being more a cultural construct rather than a physical construct. Between government and private sector, who should be driving it?
Okay, right out here in Bengaluru, where I live, at the Vidhan Sauda, it's written right on top that government's work is God's work. So to that extent, even in startup space, I do believe government's work is God's work. It's the facilitating environment, it is the overall umbrella, and under it, individual entrepreneurship will thrive. A startup actually is a very, very different environment, as you and I and everyone on this panel knows. And I think, it's best left to individuals, it's best left to entrepreneurs, it's best left to evangelists who know how to run the business. And to that extent, I think you need the government as a facilitation environment, and the rest of it, leave it to the entrepreneurial spirit, because if the government gets into that space, I think it's only going to sully it rather than actually encourage it.
Sharad, can I come back to you on this? Do you concur with that, or where do you stand? I mean, does the entry of government formally into this space cause more problems than solutions?
So let me come with a couple of answers out here. So my belief is that there's stuff that only government should do, there's stuff only private sector should do, and there's stuff we can do together. So we've talked about the stuff only government should do, which is ask the banks to basically allow credit to happen to a set of entrepreneurs which is not going to be necessarily backed by collateral. So the biggest issue that's stopping any kind of information technology-based entrepreneurship is the fact that there's a huge collateral wall that needs to be scaled. Now, leave the rest of equity-based investing to the VCs, but there's an interesting halfway. What you can do, and I know that many governments overseas do this, to say that, look, if you want to invest, if you're coming to the state of Delhi, if you're coming to the state of Maharashtra, you're coming to the state of Kerala, or whatever, if you're a recognized VC, registered under SEBI and so on and so forth, if a VC comes and says, look, I'm going to invest in this business and this is a registered VC, what the government can say is, all right, whatever you're doing, I will back you up. I'll add another 50 lakhs or 1 crore to each such company at the same valuation terms, no questions asked, and I'll stay out of the way. So in this case, government is making sure that it's not having its people on the board. It doesn't come in the way. It simply works with the VC community and the investor community in terms of extending and increasing the power of the VCs to be able to impact local businesses in each of these areas. I think that's one thing it absolutely can do. We've heard of this 10,000 crores which came in. I have no idea where it went a year and a half or 2 years ago. I hope this is the form in which it comes back into India.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Mahesh, for that. Sharad, I don't know if you're there and you're able to hear me clearly, but if we were to define the dire needs for entrepreneurs in this country, what would they be?
Yeah. So first, I want to go back to what Mahesh was saying. See, Mahesh, ironically, in your city tomorrow, they're announcing the India Aspiration Fund, which is the 10,000 crores. It's, I think, been set up correctly, in my opinion. Fund of funds is going to be managed by 7 people. Only 2 are government people, SIDBI, 5 are non-government people. So it looks very promising. And it is intended to do exactly what you talked about. 30% of the corpus will come from the government, 70%, no questions asked, it's co-investment blindly. So that's a step in the right direction. Coming back to the question that you asked, Govind, my sense is, see, we are caught in a bind. We are at one level captivated by the China model. The China model was a copy-paste model. Copy-paste created clearly national winners, and those winners have become meaningful companies on a global basis. And that made sense because, they didn't let the global companies come into China, right? Now in India, we are celebrating the copy-paste entrepreneurs, but the fact of the matter is that there is global competition. And increasingly, as time develops, it is becoming clear that this copy-paste model, the original holder of the business model is going to win this. And our copy-paste entrepreneur without innovation is not going to go anywhere. So if we follow the global marketplace model, as Israel has done, then our entrepreneurship has to be innovation-led. It cannot be copy-paste-led. If we are going to celebrate copy-paste, then let us erect protectionist walls like China did, because that's the only way it will thrive. This dissonance has to be resolved. We got to decide, if we are going to be an open market, then it's got to be innovation-led entrepreneurship. If it's going to be a closed market, then of course copy-paste will create national winners for us. We can't have both ways, which is the confusion that we have today. If we have to go down this path of innovation, then look, for 4 years, our innovation index has been falling. Last year, it fell most dramatically 11 points. We are now 86th in the world ranking for innovation now. And this is not a index. It is an index which has some kind of credibility. It's been around for some time. A lot of effort goes by INSEAD and WIPO and other people who have been constructing this global innovation index. So where the role of the government is to put the enablers in place so that we can turn the corner on creating innovation which is meaningful, which creates unique solutions, which are not copy-paste solutions. Because until that happens, you will not get the right type of entrepreneurship to come, which is to take that unique solution and use entrepreneurship to get it to the masses, to deploy it to the masses. That is really the kind of entrepreneurship that will change India, whether it's education, healthcare, or any other field that we are talking about. And therefore, the government has a role to play to create an innovation ecosystem here in India.
Okay, Shahid. Rajiv, I don't know if you're still there, but if I can come back to, if you were to define the 2 or 3 dire needs or the opportunities, depending on how you look at it, for the Indian entrepreneurship ecosystem, what would they be today? And if I can get your sort of closing comments on what's the way forward?
No, Govind, I think we must be very careful in trying to paint entrepreneurship with one broad brush. There is many types of entrepreneurship that have to be created, encouraged, boosted in India. At the top of the pyramid is, of course, what we see in the tech space. It has been driven by innovation and creativity, and that is globally relevant. And that is probably where you benchmark India with Israel and the Silicon Valley. But the whole aspect of the disorganized, unorganized sector that provides for about 85% of all jobs in India, who are all, like somebody mentioned on your panel, the telewalas, the motorcycle repair shop, the tailor shop, and all of these are also entrepreneurs. They're self-employed, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 employees in the system. That has been kept out of the entire financial system for decades. So Mudra Bank, the India Aspiration Fund, all of these are the pieces that the government is putting together in terms of making sure entrepreneurship percolates, doesn't stay at the top, but percolates down and becomes something more meaningful and deeply felt within the overall economic framework of the Indian economy. So I think we are on the right track. We will find entrepreneurship at very different levels in the economy. And I think, to try and sort of compare Bangalore to Silicon Valley or India to Israel is really missing the point of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a much broader, much deeper economic construct than saying it's about 4 people, doing something innovative in tech. And that's, I think, the direction that the government is going. I'm fairly confident that what we are doing is right. It is going to be transformational. It is going to create a lot more jobs as we go forward through entrepreneurship rather than public spending and public enterprises and the large corporates. So that's my take on where we are going on entrepreneurship.
Right. Okay. Harish, we're just sort of collecting closing comments. So, as we sort of look at the way forward, I mean, what's the future as you see it? I mean, where is the point of tension between government, private sector, young entrepreneurs, and of course the opportunity that is India?
I think the ecosystem is in place, particularly the startup ecosystem is really in place. And I think you can isolate as many as 9 different centers in India being the startup hotspots. So come what may, entrepreneurship will continue. Government or no government, the involvement will be very, very deep. The best ideas will actually float and the rest will sink. So to that extent, things will continue. But at the end of the day, it's extremely important to understand that entrepreneurship of the young actually creates a lot of jobs. And I do believe Mr. Modi's attention to this is specifically oriented to job creation. And I think that is the joy of the startup, the ability to give people jobs, which we have not been able to give despite, n numbers of plans and n numbers of years and n numbers of budgets that have focused on this. Jobless growth has been the one terminology that has defined the Indian economy, and I think cracking it lies with the startup.
Right. Sharad, the other thing, I mean, perhaps it plays to your innovation point and the whole innovation, construct that you're trying to build. Is there perhaps a need for government to also equally focus on ensuring that there is a market or the right market for startups and entrepreneurs? For instance, there are so many innovations still waiting for fruition because of maybe not sufficient developments or movement on the regulatory space in telecom, financial inclusion, payments, and so on. So, could the government be doing more there first, and then maybe talking about saying, okay, let me jump headlong into the basic sort of the base level ecosystem?
Clearly.
So,
sorry, Mahesh. Go ahead. I thought this was.
Okay, I was unclear who the question was addressed to. I'm sorry because the audio is a little hard.
Go ahead,
but thank you, Sharad,
you
for giving me the mic. Let me move ahead. In reaction to Sharad's earlier point, I do agree that unlike China, which is a copy-paste ecosystem, India is not. The Facebook of India is Facebook. The Google of India is Google. The Twitter of India is Twitter. And there's reason to believe, personally at least, that the Amazon of India will be Amazon. So. But the thing is, it's not the government that's been backing the copy-paste. It's the large Chinese, Japanese, Russian money that's been backing these copy-paste companies. It's not the government's fault. Let these guys put their money whatever they want to copy-paste, and they'll figure out that it's not going to go very far. I think the bigger and the more important thing is there are two sides of creating the push-through to happen in entrepreneurship. You want to be able to help people start, as well as you want to be able to help people run. And the best way to have the second happen is to allow, for example, a significant percentage of government purchasing to happen from the same entrepreneurs. The problem right now is government purchasing is deeply biased against anything that is entrepreneurial.
Right.
If you try to sell something to the government, every tender notice, every RFP states you need 5 years experience, you need 50 crores minimum net worth, you need 20 crores in the bank, 1 crore of earnest money tender. So my entire point is that much like, you've actually taken an effort to incite people to start up, allow them to sell to the government, let the government itself allow entrepreneurs to sell, by relaxing the norms that allow newfound enterprises to be able to bid for government contracts. There's a huge amount of spending, $1 trillion worth that the government does. Even getting 1% or 2% of it to happen to startups is going to make an enormous difference to create our own market for our own products and services.
Right, and that in a sense answers my question as well, Mahesh, about what could the government be doing in some ways in the intermediary stage before actually jumping into the arena, as it were. Sharad, last word?
Yeah, so I think very good points. I agree with Mahesh. Government has to play the role of a market maker. There is a proposal on the table as to how they can do that. Instead of trying to fix the L1 process, which is mired into difficulties, there is a different idea which is called challenge grants. And the government issues challenge grants, and they pick the most innovative company. And instead of robber barons becoming rich on the back of the government, there are innovators who become rich on the back of the government. This is a proven model, tried out in the US, in Europe, in many places. There's certainly something that we can adopt. The last point that I like to make, which is needed to make it happen. Look, even in Silicon Valley, there would have been no Google if there was no Stanford. If there was no DARPA, there would be no Cisco.
Yeah.
If there was no Linux, there would be no Red Hat. So even in the valley, you need public goods for these private wealth creation to happen. So we got to create these public goods here, and these public goods will come from innovation factories or universities or other forms of grants that are necessary for that to happen. For us to believe that these public goods are not necessary or optional is not realistic at all. We will need to invest in these public goods. They are the sources of innovation, and then smart entrepreneurs go out and monetize that,
Right.
and that is how private wealth is created. So that's a missing part, where we haven't paid much attention. But the years to come, we'll have to do that if we really want to build on.
And then should be as we engage and I sort of start holding hands with the young startup ecosystem in the country. I ask last word and then we say goodbye.
I think, look, just to turn the whole premise around, that if you don't have India as a startup nation, if you don't have entrepreneurship, you're going to be in hell, because you've got 125 crore population to support. There'll be so much of a lag pulling everybody down, because the government can't absorb everybody in jobs. Neither can the existing, industry or industrial sector. So you have to have startups. You have to have more companies, more manufacturing units, which will create more jobs.
And create the right linkages, as both Sharad, Mahesh and Rajiv and Harish have pointed out. I mean, whether it's to create sort of purchasing systems for the government and thus encouraging younger companies, not being weighed against older companies, creating the public goods which are so critical to nurturing and a startup system, and of course the legal regulatory infrastructure to ensure that companies eventually incorporate in India and the wealth stays in India in the truest sense. We've run out of time on India Hangout. We're going to be back. There are lots of interesting subjects to pick up from here and move on. We will be back soon. Thanks for watching.